The state assembly member, Jacqui Irwin, and her assistant, Vera. I'm not sure of your official title.
I'm a field rep.
Field representative for Jacqui. That's an important job. And you were my student. So thank you so much for being here. And we are going to play a short video, but would you like to say a few words before this?
I will. I just want to say I am so excited to be here. You know, up in the state legislature, all we've been worried about is how do we get kids back in school. So to see all your smiling faces, you know, you have this fabulous teacher, and you're starting to learn fully again. And it's just really exciting for me. And we'll go over a few other things about my background, but I wanted you to give a little about your background.
Hi everyone, very nice to be here. My name is Jacquis, and I actually went to Leavenwood School when I was in elementary, and then I went to R.J. Frank, and she was actually my teacher, Miss Cher, and then I went to Channel Islands High School. So I'm very happy to be here back in my community, and I went to UCSB for college. So I'm very happy to be here, and the assembly member is going to be talking to you.
Oh, yay!
Although we all pronounce, I still don't have exactly the pronounce it. She's doing a fabulous job, brilliant job, and a lot of the work that we had to do was, I'm sure many of you had parents that might have been out of a job and they weren't getting all their money from the state, and so for the last year and a half, and the hire came in the middle of that, my staff has just been answering the phone and trying to make sure that people were connected to the services they had. So it was very traumatizing because they have heard a lot of really difficult stories.
Yes.
So
thank you for your service. Thank you. So we're going to start with the video.
yes, we'll start with the video.
And you can have a seat anywhere you'd like.
I'll stand for my community and my city, and then I got the opportunity to serve an even greater population up in Sacramento, and I jumped at it, and I love this job. It's stressful, it's fast-paced, but I really feel like the legislature is making a big difference in people's lives. Assemblymember Jacqui Irwin, and this is a day in the life of an Assemblymember. On Monday morning, I get up about 4:30 and drive over to Burbank Airport and fly into Sacramento, where it is non-stop. Generally, the first thing I need to do is read the bills that are going to be up on the assembly floor on Monday. We have a whole bill package, and the way the bills move is that we first have to present them to committees, and then hopefully they get through the committees and onto the floor, and then we have to present them on the floor. So the committees that I am part of are the Veterans Committee, which I chair, Ag, Higher Ed.
All right. Well, we always like to show this video because I haven't been able to do that for a while, because so many people say, oh, what does an assembly member do? They're not exactly sure, but basically I am the representative of this area up in Sacramento, and I am in Sacramento from January through September, and then we do a lot of travel during this time, and that's how I'm able to come and visit you guys, and this is really one of the best things, is to be able to see the people that are living here. So I was asked to talk a little bit about my background and how I got into the assembly, but really focusing on Be the Change. And I think it's so fabulous that that your teacher is really having you think about that, because especially during this time, so many of us see things that are not going that well, or friends that are not doing that well, or maybe a family that's hungry, and we think, how can we change that? We're only one person. But each of you really do have the power to do that. And that was a lesson that I sort of learned early on. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, and both of my parents were immigrants, so you know, they didn't speak the best English, and I was always a little bit insecure when I was going to school to have my parents come around, and I thought I didn't know as much as all the other kids did. But I started swimming, and I swam through middle school, and then when I got to high school, and this is Taft High School, which is in Woodland Hills, I got to middle school, there was a swim team there. I was so excited, but there was no girls swim team, so I had to swim on the boys swim team. And So I did quite well, mine all the way up to city finals, but something happens between 10th and 11th grade, and it's much harder for girls to compete against boys in swimming. So I thought, why don't we have a girls swim team here? And I went to the assistant principal and I said, I think we should have a girls swim team. And he said no. And then I went back and got signatures from all the girls that said that they would be on the swim team. And I went back to the assistant principal and he said no. I did that for 6 months. And at the end of it, he just got so tired of me that he said, all right, Jacqui, we'll have a girls swim team. And the following year, Taft High School had a girls swim team, and we were one of the top teams in the entire city of LA. And that really taught me a lesson that if you want to get something done, if you're passionate about it, you really need to focus, and you need to not look at the roadblocks. I went on to college. I swam at UCSD. I studied engineering, so I got a degree in systems engineering. I worked at a place called the Applied Physics Lab where we tracked rockets, missiles, and figured out why they didn't land exactly where they were supposed to land. And then I worked at Teledyne Systems Company. And after I had my third child, I ended up moving to Thousand Oaks with my husband, my 3 kids, and I stayed at home with them and started getting very involved in other ways that I could make a difference. So I started an after-school enrichment program and did fundraising for the schools. And then my oldest son started with Titans football. How many of you are involved in sports right now? Oh, I love seeing that. I'm just such a fan. I think there's so many great lessons you learn from it. Well, my oldest son started playing football. I know nothing there. Well, the next year, all the dads got together and said, you're going to be the president of the Thousand Oaks Titans Football League. Like, oh my gosh, but I must not have been in the room, and they put me in that position. So the first thing I did is I thought, the fields at this school are really bad. And I think we need to figure out a way to fix that. So I went to a city council member, and I said, does the city have any money to fix the fields at the high school? And he said, I want you to think a little bit bigger. We have money, it's kind of hidden away, and I want you to do something that's much bigger than that. Something that benefits all 3 of the schools in Thousand Oaks. So I went to parents at all 3 of the high schools, and I talked to a whole bunch of kids, and we talked about things like the band can't play, the band can't play because the field is muddy, and after football's done with the field, then it's too muddy for soccer, and one of the fields only had mud around the track, and there were kids that could have gotten scholarships, and they were breaking their ankles. So we got all those stories together, and we went to the city council meeting. I had 50 kids speak, and 150 people came to the meeting. And at the end of the meeting, the city council said, here's $2 million. And then the school district matched it, and then the next year or so, each of the schools had new tracks and fields and stands. But again, I could have just said, let's leave it as is, or somebody else will fix it. But I got people together and really energized on this issue. So that city council member said, you are so good at organizing the community, I want you to run for city council. So I never wanted to be in politics. All of you probably know politics, it's a crazy business right now, and you get a lot of criticism, and you're always doing something wrong, you can't make everybody happy. But I thought that they were having a lot of problems at that time. So he said to me, what you need to do is knock on a whole bunch of doors, look people in the eye and say, I want you to vote for me. Raise money and do everything you can so that on election night, that you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I did everything I possibly could. So from the beginning of August all the way through the election, every day I went and knocked on doors and asked people to vote for me. I didn't take a single day off. At the end, I ended up knocking on 8,000 doors, and I called him up on election day, and I said, I think I did everything I possibly could have done. And he said, well, what did the last person whose door you knocked on say? They said they voted for me already. And he said, well, I think you got this in the bag. And when the election returns came in, I ended up getting a seat on the Thousand Oaks City Council and being an incumbent. And it was just such an incredible job because there are so many ways to help people. We were able to get solar panels at the wastewater plant, so really clean up the wastewater plant so that you're using clean energy as opposed to pulling energy off the grid. We were able to get a new pool, community pool. That was one of my big projects. A lot of good work in those 10 years. And then, as I mentioned on here, I was asked to run for the state assembly when the seat opened up. And I thought, well, I can really help more people in the community by doing that. So I did the same thing. I knocked on a whole bunch of doors. I asked people to come and help me. I talked about all the change we could make in these local communities that I would be representing. And I ended up getting elected 7 years ago. And now I represent Thousand Oaks and Moore Park, Camarillo, Westlake, about 2/3 of Oxnard and Wainini. And it is, one of the first things I did when I was elected is that we actually had a bill to outlaw, and this was, kids came to me with this idea. There is something called powdered alcohol, and you can just mix water with it and it turns into alcohol, but you can also actually mix it with other alcohol and then it turns into really strong alcohol. And there were a lot of kids groups that realized what a danger that could be. So that was one of the first bills I had, was to outlaw powdered alcohol in California. So that's not a thing here. And then, you know, as the years went on, I have focused in a whole bunch of different areas. Cybersecurity is one of the most, you'll hear so much about it, and most of you think, oh, it doesn't really apply to me. But there are people that can, when you have a bank account, that they can break into your bank account. They can take over your phone. Your phone could turn into a spy device. So make sure that you always have good passwords when you have apps. Make sure, and how many of you have Gmail?
Everybody
has Gmail? How many people have two-step authentication on your Gmail? Oh, okay, I have. So that, what two-step authentication is that if you open it on another device, it sends you a code. So, Ms. Scher, maybe you could do that, because that is the most important way to keep everything safe.
I will be sure to work on that.
Yeah, we'll give you all our cybersecurity,
thank you.
all our cybersecurity tips. But the biggest issue that I really do focus on is education, because I think education is for me and for my parents, that was the thing that gave them the opportunity to live a fulfilling life here in California. It is really what addresses the income gap. So I was able to get some money to open an early childhood education center at Cal State Channel Islands, so that students who have children can still bring their children, help with the workforce there. We were able to get money for an engineering school. Are any of you interested in the STEM field? Right? Oh, we have a few very reluctant hands going up. Well, it is, I'm really glad to see at least a few people are really interested in it, but those are great jobs, and there is such a need for them. Companies are hiring people left and right. And what they really want is they want many more people of color or women, because in general, in those tech fields, you see a lot of the same type of person, and you can't create great products if you don't have a diversity. So if any of you have an interest, if you like computer science or math or regular science, those are really great fields. I hate to say that because you're an English teacher, but
They have to write in everything.
and you have to write in everything. So we've got the engineering school at Cal State Channel Islands, so if you want to stay in this area, there's the fantastic engineering school there. But one of the biggest problems I saw was that at Oxnard Community College, what was happening is that the students that are going to community college, they take this test that puts them in remedial education, like remedial English or remedial math. So I've talked to kids that had taken calculus and they took the test and they ended up in remedial math. So we changed the law, and it was really affecting here in Oxnard, it was really affecting a lot of Latinos and black students at a much higher rate than white students, that they were being put in remedial classes. What happens if you're in remedial classes at Oxnard or any of the community colleges, you only have a 25% chance of actually taking a transfer level class. Most kids drop out. So we revamped completely how remedial education is done at the community colleges. Performance. Not at that one test that you take during the summer when you might have just come back from the beach. And then they place you, if they can, in transfer level classes with tutoring so that you're still able to get through community college more quickly. So my top focus is always going to be on education. It's been a really difficult time for a lot of students. They haven't had things like a good internet connection to finish their schoolwork, so their state is making a big investment in broadband. But this will continue to be my focus over the next 4 years, because there is nothing more important to making sure that every student has equal access to a great education. So that kind of covers it. I think here you heard about the committees I'm on. We have passed probably 60 different bills that affect the entire state. And I can talk about all sorts of different areas, but I am really more interested in what your questions are if I haven't covered something that you're more interested in.
Wow,
So
thank you. That was such incredible information. And, for the record, a lot of the things that Assemblymember Irwin is working on, I have been right behind you, supporting you, really working on those things. Today, we actually did a survey to pick our top 6. So we have 6 volunteers. We have Chris, we have Alexis, we have Abril, we have Jacob, and I'm missing, who are the 2? Alyssa, and who's the last one? George, right? Okay, so we have 6 questions.
a lot of questions.
Yeah. So would anyone like to start us off? Alyssa, why don't you stand up so she can see you? And this is Alyssa.
Hi, Alyssa.
Should four-year college be available to everyone who wants it? For free.
That is, in many countries, it is. Four-year college is available to everybody. And when I went to school, it was extremely inexpensive. So I think maybe it was $190 a quarter. So optimally, we would like four-year college to be free to everybody. For students that are low income right now, there are a lot of loans available. So even if you come from a family that doesn't have necessarily the means to send you to a four-year college, there are a lot of loans and grants that are available to you. So that should never be something that stops you. We have made, a couple of years ago, we made the first year of community college free. We just switched to making the second year of community college free. And I think in the long run, we would really like to see four-year college be accessible to everybody, but to really fund it for the very wealthy students, it's a question mark whether that makes as much sense when you're prioritizing as making sure that you have enough financial aid for the students that might come from homes that wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to send kids to four-year school. So in an optimal situation, it would be nice if it was free. Until that point, we're just trying to make it as affordable as possible according to your means.
Thank you.
Sure.
What is the most difficult aspect of your job?
So the most difficult aspect is that so often we have really complicated bills. You might have a bill that you're voting on that has 50 pages, and we really analyze it and try and think of the unintended consequences and how much is this going to cost and should we be prioritizing it. But a lot of times the public has an idea that a bill does X, Y, and Z only. They have a very simple idea about what the bill does. And then they really want you to vote for it, and then they don't understand why you don't. So I would say dealing with whether people know what's in it or not, that makes it very difficult. But on many of these issues, there's two sides. And if you take one side, then people are going to be upset at you. And if you take the other side, people are going to be upset at you. So it's trying to explain what your reasoning is. And I, again, have a very different district. There's a very conservative part of the district over in that direction and a less conservative part in this direction. And so you're trying to balance and make decisions on what you think the majority of your constituents want. But sometimes it makes people very angry when they don't understand all the steps that we've gone through to make sure we're making the right decision. Does that make sense?
Good answer. I like that. All right.
It's more of an opinion question, but would you leave your current job for a higher paying job, elected office or not?
No, I wouldn't. If there was another elected office that I thought I could do something better for the community, just like I left the city council and I went to the assembly. I'm so happy to have this job and be able to make a difference in the areas that I'm making a difference in. So for the next few years, if the voters elect me again, I would like to stay in elected office. I'm not really driven by the financial part of it. A lot of people, if they're offered, they have families to support. My kids are grown, and I'm married, so I'm not a single mom. They might have to make decisions more based on being able to make much more than what a legislator makes. But I'm in the situation where I can really pick what I do. I'm already paid for my kids' college, so that's very helpful. But it is something you always weigh. Like, I do weigh where can I do the most good.
That was an interesting question, how we came to that, just so you know. It was a little bit of a combination of, is there something else that you would do? But also with regard to how, like the salary that elected officials make, because it is a job, and also the fact that you have such an extensive background in science and the opportunities that might have been there for you in that direction as opposed to serving the public. So that was a really we were very thoughtful about that question, so thank you for the answer.
Yeah, and I did have, and thank you for clarifying that, I did have, I had a career in science. In science and math and engineering, it's a little bit difficult to go back after you've stayed home and raised your children, and then you're on the city council for 10 years, and then you have, now I've been in the assembly for 7 years. It's a little difficult it would be difficult to go back into that area. So my job right now is being able to set policy, but the world is changed. For you guys, you are already used to this technical world, but in 2004 or so, nobody had their smartphone. I think the iPhone came out in 2007. Nobody had a connected phone, and we now have issues that we're really grappling with, like I don't know if you, are any of you on Facebook, or there's probably a little passe, right? Oh, a few of you. Facebook they had what I thought was kind of a fun feature, the facial recognition, where they can find you in a picture and then tell you, this picture's posted. All sorts of really scary issues where you have maybe the police filming everybody in a private gathering or in a protest, let's say, and then going after people that haven't done anything wrong. So for me right now, to have the opportunity to form policy on the technology that I understand about is almost even a better opportunity, even though it doesn't make it, more money than a legislator, but trying to put some parameters and controls. A lot of companies take, when you're on, let's say you're on the weather app, and you say, hey, use my location, and then it shows you went over to Camarillo and now you know what the weather is. They take all that information, since you didn't turn off your location services, and they sell it. And I talked to a guy that worked at this weather app, and he says, I know where you walked in the grocery store and where you stopped to look a little bit longer. And we use that data for marketing purposes. So it's really important, even though we have all these benefits, from the apps on the phone, it's really important to understand, to make sure that companies keep your information private if you want it private. And I would say the other thing for let's see, who has iPhones? Everybody has iPhones.
I think we pretty much, yeah.
So what's kind of interesting, I told you to do your two-step authentication on your Gmail. That prevents somebody from taking over your email account, because the dark web already has your password, because I'm sure all of you use the same password for everything. But if you do two-step authentication, they still can't get in. So the bad guys already have your passwords. They can break into your accounts if they get into your phone. But if you go through and look at location services and it lists all your apps, it shows you which apps are following you. And you've basically given them permission, and they are doing things like following you in the grocery store. So you should go through those apps and say, which apps really need to know where I am? You know, maybe Maps needs to know, or I personally really like the Starbucks app, because I like to be able to order, Starbucks at one place, maybe while my husband is driving, and then be able to pick it up, just, go right to the front of the line. So they can have my location data when I go to Starbucks. But there's really no reason for the weather app to have your location. There's a whole bunch of things that don't need your location. So I would suggest if all of you do that one little thing, then you start to control your data. But we as policymakers are trying to rein some of this in, that all your information isn't out, doesn't know every bit of information from you. Because you might not worry about it right now, but maybe when you're a little bit older, it could be detrimental to your work life. It could be, stuff that you post on Instagram. It could be that you're looking for a job, and it's been open, it's been sent out to everybody. So privacy is really important, and the right policy is really important too. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. All right, Everett, want to answer your question?
Is there something bigger that you would like to work on?
You mean in the state legislature, or?
Yeah. Like something that you're not necessarily working on now, but a bigger project.
So there are a lot of things that just come up, and then we think, oh, that is really something we should work on to try to correct. So last year, one of the bills that I worked on was, so I don't know if any of you know what hospice is?
Hospice? Or maybe a few.
So would anybody like to tell me what they think hospice is?
Ezekiel?
Isn't it that, like, issue up there?
That, probably with the same name, but
Isn't it like a medical thing where people check up on them?
and there's, it is medical, but it's that, go ahead.
Isn't it where you, like, go home for bed rest?
Oh, go home for bed rest?
Oh, and that's all, it's all getting closer. What hospice is, and it's sort of a scary thing to think about, but hospice, because it's all along all these lines, hospice is where somebody is very close to dying, and that you say to the doctors, I want to be at home to die. I want enough painkillers. The doctor says you're dying, and it's much more comforting, and that's called hospice. And it's, for some families, it's a great thing, but it turns out as soon as the government gives money to hospices, then there's a lot of bad players in there. So there's a lot of people that say, oh, you're not dying, but we can do hospice for you, and so it's turned into this big business that is not good for older people or very sick people, and that are not dying. So we've done some work in that area, and that was because it was a big newspaper story in the LA Times. So we're doing reforms because all these hospices are popping up, taking money from the government. So we're trying to correct that. So we want to do some more work on there. But this morning in the paper, so it's always stories that are, we have long-term things we work on, but then it's stories in the paper. So this morning, or yesterday, there's a story about there were people that had embryos. So, some families have problems getting pregnant, and so outside of the body they mix up the egg and the sperm, and they have an embryo, and then it's implanted, and it's easier to it's a way to have a baby when you're having problems having babies. So there was And about 2% of people have babies that way, that there's some sort of medical issue. Well, there's a story about how 2 embryos got mixed up. So a couple had a baby and didn't figure out until 6 months later that it wasn't their child. Somebody else had their baby, and the mom had, birthed the baby, had the baby, and raised it for 6 months, and it turned out that wasn't their baby. So what we're looking at is there has to be this is the most horrible thing that could possibly happen, that you think you're raising your own baby and it's somebody else's baby and then they switched around. So we're looking at, like, are there better regulations that should be put in place? Do we have to put laws into place that prevent things like that? So there's big issues that you take years and years to work on, and sometimes it's a story in the paper where you say that is terrible, and we have to see if there's a law that can fix that.
Great answer, amazing. All right.
Could more be done to alleviate the homeless crisis?
Oh, I was waiting for that. That is a great question, and it is when they do surveys, the #1 issue for Californians is, like, why is nothing being done about the homeless crisis? And it's very complicated. If there was an easy solution, more would be done. But if you look at Los Angeles, they're spending a lot of money on homelessness, and they're really not making a dent in the population. We're doing the same in Ventura County. We have a much smaller population, but the state has given money to buy hotels, and because it's much quicker housing to put homeless people in hotels. But the problem with a lot of the homeless, and we look at veterans and other homeless, is a lot of them the vast majority have substance abuse problems and mental health problems. So you can't just put them in the hotel. You really have to look at what kind of services can you provide to kind of get them assimilated back into the world. And I think the problem has almost gotten so overwhelming in certain areas that we're not even sure what are the right ways to treat it. From my personal perspective, we have to build housing, even if it's small houses. I was at the opening of this Family Justice Center in Ventura, and they have small houses, real, like this big. And it could just be that at least could maybe be used, put those in a certain area. It's not like where everybody wants to live long term, but get people into housing and get them mental health services and get them substance abuse services. But this is, most of the time, if any of you might have family members that are homeless, or cousins, or uncles, and you'll find in almost every case there's a mental health, or they're drinking, or they're taking drugs, and that's kind of how you spiral down and end up on the street. Then there's a whole other level of homeless, the ones you don't see, and that might be the mom with, the single mom that wasn't able to make her last rent payment and is living in the car with her kids. And those are the ones that we really need to put all the resources into making sure that she didn't get kicked out in the first place. So the best way to really prevent that type of homelessness is to try to intervene before they lose their home, because then it all spirals downhill. So huge issue, and we're all trying to figure out ways that we can better deal with it.
So with regard to that question, when we were preparing for you, and I asked the students to submit some questions that they would like to have you answer, and overwhelmingly homelessness or housing insecurity was the #1 question that students asked overwhelmingly. So that one question is really reflective of the highest majority of questions asked in this class.
So you're just like the rest of California.
Yes.
This is a problem that we really have to solve, but you also have to look at it at really 2 levels, and where we can really make the impact is making sure that people don't lose their home or their apartment, because then it becomes much more problematic to get them into a new place. And the county has money for people that are at that situation. The state has had a lot of money, especially during the pandemic, and the federal government, you just have to know how to apply for it. If you know anybody in that situation, by the way, there is right now, there's still a whole bunch of money for people that are about to lose their housing because they couldn't work due to the pandemic. And just, you know people, or, yes?
You can tell me.
Tell the teacher, and reach out to our office, and we can show where those resources are. Because a lot of people that are on the verge there, they're not necessarily reading the paper that there's help to keep them in their homes.
That's good information, Deborah, thank you. All right, George, what's your question?
Why would you want to be a politician in the first place?
Oh,
You answered a little bit about that.
yeah. So I mean, I love it now that I'm doing it, but I was, you know, there's a lot of my colleagues that really thought, they kind of went the same route I did, that you just wanted to fix a problem, that you thought you could do better, you thought you had the right experience, and that's why you went into it. But we were doing something else. It's not like, oh, I want to be I never thought that while I was going to school that I wanted to be a politician. It happened that there was an opening for me to do it. It's very hard to plan to be a politician because it's all about timing and do you have a good constituency. The best way to become a local politician is not saying I want to be a politician, but let's say working for an organization that's really popular in your community. So maybe you volunteer at MyCop, or maybe you coach at, you coach little kids, and then you start to build your constituency, and then maybe there's a school board position that opens up, or a city council position, and then you have people that actually are more likely to vote for you because they know you. But just to say I want to be a politician, it usually doesn't. It doesn't just work like that. We slide into it because all the opportunities stay together. Oh, okay.
Well, that was wonderful. Everyone, let's give Assemblyman.
For being such a great audience. I really appreciate it. And again, if there's anything we can do for you or for your families, or if you're interested in learning more about government, please reach out to your teacher and she'll connect you to our office. And you've been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.